It's Kraken week. A bunch of creators are delving into the ocean depths to discuss some of the coolest things in the seven seas. And today, I want to talk about a species of aquatic creature that breaks every single rule on how the gods work in Dungeons & Dragons. Prepare yourself for history, philosophy, and mind flayers, as today we tackle the Kuo-Toa. First, some background. The Kuo-Toa are a species of aquatic fish people who resemble trout or mackerel in the current 5th edition. They have been present for every single edition of the game, and are one of only 11 monsters selected as part of D&D's unique product identity back in the 3rd edition, alongside Beholders and Mind Flayers. But what are Kuo-Toa more broadly, apart from denizens of a place that I have not found in a single one of my Baldur's Gate 3 playthroughs? As with many of the species of the Underdark, they have spent much time at the rather limited mercy of the Mind Flayers as subjects of experiments that seem to have awakened strange psionic powers within them. For example, in 5th edition, they can see into the ethereal plane using their 1,000-yard stare. This likely means that the entire species is constantly haunted by spirits, which really comes across in their official artwork. This makes the Kuo-Toa excellent mediums and spirit channelers, as they can really sense the spirits around them, able to perhaps not distinguish between living and dead creatures, meaning that their eyes are often focused on something far, far beyond you. In another world, the spirit realm. Perhaps the most interesting feature of the Kuo-Toa is buried in their lore. To quote the Monster Manual, if enough Kuo-Toa believe that a god is real, the energy of their collective unconscious can cause that god to manifest as a physical entity. The entity's form depends on the visual inspiration for its existence, which explains why Blibdool-Boop, one of their most revered deities, is a gigantic humanoid woman with a crayfish head and claws for hands. This deity was based on a modified humanoid statue that was so visually engaging in its creativity that it became an object of worship, and through that became a god. So yes, in some way, the experiments or the cruelties of the Mind Flayers imbued the Kuo-Toa with the unique ability to collectively, subconsciously manifest entirely new deities. And this is all fun and games with deities like Blibdool-Pulp, but there is a reason why the video is titled as it is. This power should not exist in any D&D world. And the fact that it does, that the creatures who hold it have such a tie to D&D's identity and history, means that we should really be rethinking how we present gods, godhood, and deities across the board in the light of the Kuo-Toa's unique and marvelous power. How divinity works in D&D may well be turned on its head, partly for us as game players and designers, but most certainly for the denizens of your fantasy worlds. I firmly believe that an in-universe study of the Kuo-Toa's religious practices would lead to a massive cultural shift in how all fantasy cultures view faith, creating something similar to our real world's enlightenment and completely destroying the systems of divinity and the flow of souls forever. But before all that, I want to go back to the 19th century in our world, back to two men with deeply troubling and disturbing personal views and potentially lacking in academic rigor. Both of these men are attempting to discuss the concept of religion. Sigmund Freud has become something of the poster child of being wrong. His opinions on the workings of the human mind and psyche are largely only considered foundational because he invents all of the terminology. But one thing he didn't invent was the concept of a collective unconscious mind shared among all mankind. This was developed by eminent thinker in his own right, Carl Jung, and forms the basis, the framework for our thinking about the Kuo-Toa. 5e claims that a collective subconscious is how the Kuo-Toa are able to manifest deities, as opposed to Jung's collective unconscious. The former being a part of the thinking mind that we are not aware of, but are able to interrogate, and the latter being part of the programming of our mind, the mental processes that are unable to be mentally interrogated even by ourselves. Automatic, non-conscious processes. In this case, both have relatively similar meanings, in that the part of the mind that the Kuo-Toa are not focused on or not interested in at all is doing some work behind the scenes to create this divine manifestation aura, this power that they have. We do need to return to the much maligned Freud, though, regrettably, because the Kuo-Toa as a species seem almost perfectly designed to reflect his exact view of what faith is. Freud saw religious ritual as very similar to obsessive compulsion, and decried the concept of the divine as an illusion created by man for wish fulfillment, to stave off the inevitability of death, impermanence and mortality by creating some grand father in the sky to protect and aid us. Freud also noted the centrality of totems in the development of religion, and often, scratch that, almost always made some connection between totems and primal guilt or extreme daddy issues, essentially. You might be seeing my point already. The way Kuo-Toan faith exists in D&D is an almost exact carbon copy of Freud's ideas about how faith worked in the most primitive of senses. The Kuo-Toa channel their trauma and horrific negative experiences at the hands of the Mind Flayers into totems and pieces of art that are eventually imbued with religious significance as creatures that will come to their aid and defend them from the terrifying monsters that lurk in the dark that they've been scared by already. Eventually, enough Kuo-Toa start collectively believing in this wish-fulfilling illusion that, you know, there's a creature out there that cares about them, and it develops into a form of faith that they are then willing to kill for. Unlike much of D&D's coverage of religion, which at worst feels just a bit underbaked, see my videos on death, polytheism and atheism for more on that, this comes across as quite a targeted description, using Freud's entire thesis as essentially a blueprint. But there is one aspect of the Kuo-Toa that is distinctly and clearly un-Freudian. The gods that they invent in their dreams and hopes are actually real. This is where we need to talk about the other fellow with the deeply disturbing personal views, H.P. Lovecraft. You see, Blip Dool Pulp was not the Kuo-Toa's only god in even early presentations of their existence in Dungeons & Dragons. They were also associated with Dagon, a being from H.P. Lovecraft's work. The short story entitled Dagon reads very strikingly indeed with this in mind. It describes a species of ancient undersea folk who are damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Sculptures of these folks are also surrounded by a great smell of dead, rotting fish and slime, two features of the Kuo-Toa's presentation since the very earliest day. It seems the Kuo-Toa are a direct reference to the creatures depicted in this exact short story, which makes sense. Much of early D&D's history was just ripping from pop culture. It is also my belief, however, that it is through Lovecraft that we get to a line of our Kuo-Toa manifesting these deities. Dreams, the power psychic, ancient faith, and circular time and creation are all heavy, heavy themes of Lovecraft's work. It stands to reason, then, that the Kuo-Toa are a Lovecraftian creature with a carbon copy of Freud's model of faith, with a healthy dose of Lovecraftian weirdness bolted on at the end. So with all this said, how exactly does the strangeness of the Kuo-Toa's inspiration make deities quake in their boots in D&D worlds? Perhaps more than any other monster in the game, the Kuo-Toa represent a distinctly modern, atheistic view of faith. They are quite literally the backwards cave dwellers, worshipping statues and inventing new gods that some critics of faith like to unfairly represent early religion as. The presentation of the Kuo-Toa literally cannot exist without our modern understandings of Enlightenment thinking. But also in their own universe, their existence implies an Enlightenment mindset. Gods in D&D exist. They are independent, real, actual entities that depend on their followers for sustenance, but don't depend on their followers for the very fact of their existence in the first place. This is a subtle difference, but it is absolutely critical. If the truth becomes known, or even observed, that the Kuo-Toa can in fact manifest deities, religious authority is instantly turned on its head. Clerics under D&D's system are already leaders of cultic movements in service of their gods, but also movements which follow the cleric around, as the cleric is the one that can do the magic. So when the mackerel men can give their archpriests at least 5th level spells, according to the monster manual, by literally dreaming up a god, there's going to be some destabilization there almost instantly. Two things are very likely to happen. One is a grand suspicion of all deities. Their doctrines may claim that they were born out of a seashell to rule the merfolk forevermore, but who's to say that this deity isn't actually lying to us, and was actually created by the merfolk's own imaginations? It is the servant of the merfolk, not the merfolk the servants of it. After all, a nearly universal truth is that no species wants to imagine themselves as in any way less competent than the Kuo-Toa. So some people will question whether their gods are invented too. This grand suspicion of the notion of godhood is made much, much worse by the fact that in almost all recorded D&D campaign settings, there are mortals that have ascended to godhood. Suddenly, there is mass confusion about what the gods even are. Exceptional persons who do amazing things and ascend to great power? Fundamental forces born at the earliest stages of the world? Manifestations of wish fulfillment? Or all of the above? And you can bet there will be theological debates and wars as to which god is which type and which type is better. This ties in to the second consequence. The cult of personality is very, very powerful in D&D. The problem with being beholden to a deity, a patron, or a spirit is that the power that you wield isn't actually yours. The archpriest of the Kuo-Toa, on the other hand, can use this collective subconscious of their followers to manifest a brand new deity just for them. At least that is how surface dwellers would likely see it. Because of concepts of conquest and individual ownership emblazoned across all material cultures on the surface world, the originator of a thing is assumed to own it until it is lost, indebted to someone else, traded away, or stolen. Thus, it stands to reason for surface dwellers that the originator of the first Bilbudul Pulp statue is the originator and owner of the deity. Even though this isn't how Kuo-Toa society actually operates, there's a lot more collectivism going on. The idea of creating a deity just for yourself is such an enticing concept on the surface world that I can very easily see a number of cults and high priests springing up, attempting to do exactly that. Creating a deity for yourself is such an enticing prospect that in those cultures that have a concept of individual ownership, we would likely see spaces and cults springing up, led by high priests who are attempting to pitch their invented deity to the masses, trying to replicate the successes of the Kuo-Toa in granting themselves almost great divine power by having a god beholden to them for its very existence. The thing is, this might even work depending on the specific setup of faith in any given Dungeons & Dragons world. Faith is power to a divine being, with both quantity and quality of worship being instrumental in forming a deity's power base. Assume now that a whole bunch of this divine worshipful energy is going not to the usual gods, but to some invented entity that does not exist. Well, you can imagine this might result in a net loss of power, a net loss of worship for the rest of the world, for the rest of the gods. In a worst case scenario, maybe this extant worshipful energy is redirected into the nearest thing. Maybe the high priest that is gathering all these worshippers begins to gain divine power themselves, or maybe some many-faced trickster god is masquerading as every single invented deity around the world, amasses such great power that he can take on the entire pantheon all by himself. In any case, at this point, Pandora's box is well and truly open. The mind of a mortal can birth a god. If this becomes anything close to a universal truth, we won't just see the invention of deities, we will see the explosion of people seeking psionic power, seeking to perfect the mind. A cultural movement espousing this mantra might be the most destructive, violent, vicious, and world-shaping event to ever happen in a Dungeons & Dragons style world. Like our own historic enlightenment, it would be a time for the toppling of the powers that be, for the development of how we use our minds and brains, and might lead to significantly loosened bonds with divinity. It could lead to a more collectivist mindset as people try to replicate the success of the Kuo-Toa in communities, or switch the other way towards a rampant individualism, a chase, a race for psionic power and the ability to make the world as you wish. And you know who benefits most by surface dwellers cavorting with psionics and leaving behind the powers of the gods? Well, Asmodeus. But he's always winning, and also not on the material plane, so we're not talking about him yet. In the world where the people are, two kinds of entities have been waiting in the wings for quite some time. Shunned, hated, exiled even from divine authority completely. The Aboleths and the Mind Flayers. A gradual weakening of divine power and more people trying to pierce through the psionic veil than ever before, these two entities will have a field day. Perhaps these Aboleths install themselves once more as gods, as these entities that we are trying to bring into existence. Or perhaps the Mind Flayers finally complete an atheistic enlightenment and manage to cut the world completely off from divine influence. There is one more major problem with this situation, and I alluded to it a few seconds ago. The outer planes are maintained by a steady stream of faithful mortal souls, and it is indeed a mortal soul's duty to go to the afterlife, assimilate with their resting plane, and become part of the planar machinery that keeps the world ticking on as it always has. Even a temporary craze of worshipping completely invented gods could rob the true deities of the followers they need to maintain their positions, the loyal followers that keep the heavens growing and even existing. This may be enough to destroy the economy of souls which allows the outer planes to even function. After all, most faiths in the material plane will be having serious schismatic discussions about the exact origin of their god, what type of deity it is, whether it can be trusted, and some members of the faith will simply have left because of all this confusion, consternation, and concern about whether the gods have been lying to them the whole time. Because at the end of the day, if even the Kuo-Toa can invent an entire deity based on a statue and some bits of crayfish, what in the hells have we been respecting, venerating, and fearing the gods for this entire time? Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this Kraken Week deep dive on one of my favourite deep sea denizens. Please do check out all the other creators' amazing videos using the Kraken Week playlist. Special thanks to Pointy Hat and Ginny D for putting all of this together, and I hope I didn't lose too many of you in the history lesson portion of the video. I'm so sorry. If you enjoyed, I would, as always, appreciate if you subscribed and did all the lovely YouTube stuff. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.